Welcome to Shadow of Truth, and today is Thursday, October the 13th, 2016, and your hosts are Dave Kranzler from InvestmentResearchDynamics.com and Rory Hall from thedailycoin.org. Dave, what's happening today?
Not a lot's happening, but a lot will be happening if I get some of these English muffins that are popping up all around me out of the toaster.
Well, let's grab an English muffin and do our market update. What do you say?
Well, we can do the market update, but I don't know if I'm going to get an English muffin because I just got the one finger salute.
Oh, well, you go address the salute, and then we'll get to the market update.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
I mean, I can't sugarcoat it. I mean, his answers to your questions, he avoided the derivatives question
completely.
Either that or he didn't understand it, which I doubt.
No, he understood it.
He understood it. He avoided it. He deflected it. All he is he was a representative of the one world, one government, Keynesian based economic status who wanna basically. Well, the only way to say it is, it's the New World Order crew, and that's right. What the IMF is all about.
Correct. See, here's my thing is that I let him speak, didn't attack him. I told him I wasn't going to attack him, and I didn't. And from my perspective, if you listen to what he says, this is what these people believe. And the sad part is that he thinks that, or I'm not going to say he, they, being the larger they, think that we are just completely ignorant and that we are 100% dependent on them. And that's the bottom line. That's what I took away from it.
I don't know about that. I don't know if he thinks that we're ignorant or not. And he's just a tool for these people. I don't know how he got brainwashed at the University of Chicago. Well, actually, I kind of do. But, I mean, his application of economics in your interview, I was like, how did this guy even get through the University of Chicago, let alone graduate from the University of Chicago? And it was just, I mean, and I don't know if he was lying when he answered some of your questions, but the only other thing you can say is that he's ignorant. I mean, to say that China is not a large producer of gold, they're the world's largest producer of gold.
Correct.
I mean, where's he getting his facts from? And then he said that the world was on a gold standard for several decades. What about the previous 5,000 years? And you can't call the Bretton Woods Agreement a gold standard. It wasn't a gold standard.
No. It was a derivative of a gold standard.
Well, there you go. There's that. There you go again. There's that word derivative. He states the gold standard collapsed. It didn't collapse.
No.
The U.S. Basically imposed its will on the world and removed it.
Right. And then they stole all the gold. Or all
right.
That they could.
Yeah. I don't know if they stole it all, but they confiscated a lot of it.
And then they outlawed it. Said, well,
right.
You little people can't have it.
Right. I mean, the only thing I could think of when he was talking was he is the direct human manifestation of Rothschild's assertion and statement that, give me control of a nation's currency and I care not who makes the laws. And that's what the IMF and the SDR is. They're trying to make the IMF, and the SDR elevated above everyone. And it's a fiat currency is what it is, because the supply of SDRs is controlled by a body of people who aren't even elected.
Right.
They're representatives of the world's billionaires.
Right.
And that's all it is. And you asked him about, my friends over in China have never said that China's interested in reinstating a gold standard. Well, that's a bunch of nonsense, because I can guarantee you his quote unquote friends over there are Western educated Chinese economists who went to either Stanford, University of Chicago, MIT, Harvard, or Princeton. And those are his quote unquote friends. And of course, they're not going to talk about gold. I mean, the idea of gold has been completely removed from the education process. I was at the University of Chicago from 1989 to 1991, and I was taking classes from all the guys who developed modern financial theory. And we didn't talk about gold once, not once. It never came up in 2 years of classes. So, there's no question that it wasn't even a consideration when he was there. And he might have even been there around the same time I was. I don't know. I don't know how old he is.
No, he was there 66 to 70, I believe.
Oh, he was back. Oh, so back then. I mean, yeah, that's when all of this stuff was being transitioned into place.
Correct.
And who cares if Milton Friedman was on his doctoral dissertation committee? By that point in time, Friedman had already jumped the shark and was part of the Keynesian fiat money, one world government ideology that had infected our entire government.
Well, I'm grateful for the interview, and I've taken a lot of flack in the comment section. People saying, I wasn't tough enough or I didn't push back enough. I mean, and I'm not going to. I'm not going to push back. I mean, I'm going to allow the person to have their say. I'm not gonna invite somebody into my home and then start beating them about the head and shoulders and say, "Yeah, you're an idiot. You're a fool." I'm not going to do that ever. It's rude, and it would cut me off from getting interviews with other people as well.
No, hey, I don't blame you for the way you conducted the interview. What was great is it gives people who listen to it insight to just how misdirected, propaganda infused, and just how insidious these people are, who are these one world, one government advocates and people who are trying to advance the cause of the one world government, which is exactly what the IMF is. That is what it's all about.
Is what it's all about. And after digesting all of this, I tend to agree with what you've said and what some other people have said, that China's role as far as them getting into the IMF and being part of the SDR is really a Trojan horse. I mean, unless they're going to start producing a lot more 1 ounce gold pandas, or they're going to start producing a lot more gold jewelry, or they have other plans that don't involve gold as money, with all of this gold that they're acquiring and all of the gold that Alistair McLeod's research has shown that they could potentially have. I mean, if you just look, if Alistair McLeod's research is only 50% correct, then that means that they have somewhere between 10 and 15,000 tons of gold somewhere. And then if you add what they have officially, which is another 1,800 tons, and Russia, why would Russia commit 80 to 100 tons of gold to China per year going forward, starting this year, if there wasn't some type of plan?
Right. We know all of this. That's just a given. I mean, now you got to take the given and try to attack these guys. And you can't attack them, because if you asked him all of that, if you just put that on a plate for him, address this, he'd say, what are you talking about, 10 or 15,000 tons? They're showing that they have 1,800 tons or whatever their latest. I don't even pay attention to that number, because it's completely meant for misdirection. And he'd say, you can't prove to me they have any more than what they say they have. And that's the number they would use. It's like the Hillary Clinton supporters. What do you mean she's a criminal? She hasn't been accused or convicted of anything. So how can you say she's a criminal? It's the same argument. And
could be all that blood on her hands.
It's just useless. Now, where the other thing that really irritated me, and shame on him for saying this about the definition of inflation, because yes, I'm sure it was taught to him when he was at the University of Chicago, because it's the classic definition of inflation. In fact, it's his beloved Milton Friedman's definition of inflation. Inflation is defined as the devaluation of the money supply. And money loses its value in relation to everything because the supply of money grows at a rate that is in excess of the rate of growth of wealth creation of a system. And that is where inflation comes from. And to point to the core, quote unquote, core CPI basket and say, see, there's no inflation here. That's either just absolute stupidity, ignorance, or just another tool of propaganda that these guys have. And then he points to oil. Well, my cost of gasoline's gone down a lot. Well, yeah, well, guess what? The only commodity that's more manipulated than gold is oil, and oil's always been completely manipulated ever since the U.S. went off the gold standard in the early 1970s, and that's why we had the inflation and the oil crisis in the 1970s. Because then once that happened, oil became the biggest. It became the biggest non-military political tool out there, and that's what it is. So you got to throw oil out of there. And his apology for why healthcare is so expensive. I thought I was listening to a 3-year-old try to explain why healthcare is so out of whack in terms of its costs.
It's incredible.
I wanted we don't really have to beat a dead horse here, because I'm sure your audience understands just how disingenuous or ignorant this guy was. And it's disingenuity, because he's clearly just, I wouldn't say he's a pawn for the NWO people. He's more like a bishop or a knight, because he's got academic credibility. And that's what they do when they put these guys in charge of the Federal Reserve. They have academic credibility. Yellen taught at Stanford. Bernanke taught at Princeton. Well, I don't know if Bernanke has just led his whole life in disingenuity or if he's just an idiot. But I have no idea how he rose to become the chairperson of Princeton's economic department, because everything he ever said indicated that he's an idiot. But I just want to read something, and this will just take a second. Under a gold standard, the amount of credit that an economy can support is determined by the economy's tangible assets. That's the definition of inflation right there. When the supply of currency increases greater than an economy's tangible assets. And I don't want to get into an argument about how you measure tangible assets, since any credit instrument is ultimately a claim on some tangible asset. But government bonds are not backed by tangible wealth, only by the government's promise to pay out of the future tax revenues, and cannot easily be absorbed by the financial markets. A large volume of new government bonds can be sold to the public only at progressively higher interest rates. Thus, government deficit spending under a gold standard is severely limited. The abandonment of the gold standard made it possible for the welfare status to use the banking system as a means of unlimited expansion of credit. Now, if anyone wants to refute that, then explain to me why every day the total amount of debt in our economic system goes up, and especially government debt. You can't argue against that, because the actual facts support that statement. They have created paper reserves in the form of government bonds, which is absolutely true, because government bonds are considered part of a nation's currency reserves. Look at China. Through a complex series of steps, the banks accept in place of tangible assets. So that's what it is, and that's what QE is. The bonds are treated as if they're tangible assets, and treat as if they were an actual deposit, i.e. the equivalent of what was formerly a deposit of gold. The holder of a government bond or of a bank deposit created by paper reserves believes that he has a valid claim on a real asset. And that right there is what shoots a nuclear torpedo into the use of the SDR. But the fact that there is now more claims outstanding than real assets. The fact is, there are more claims outstanding than real assets. That happened in the 60s. The law of supply and demand is not to be conned. As the supply of money, of claims, increases relative to the supply of tangible assets in the economy, prices must eventually rise. Look at autos, look at education, look at housing, look at healthcare. And you're talking about the expenditures that an average household spends the majority of their expenditures on. Thus, the earnings saved by the productive members of the society lose value in terms of goods. When the economy's books are finally balanced, one finds that this loss in value represents the good purchased by the government for welfare or other purposes with money proceeds of the government bonds financed by bank credit expansion. In the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. I'm sure you know what that's from.
It's from, it sounds like Keynes.
Nope. Alan Greenspan, Golden
Ah.
Economic Freedom, 1966.
Well, thank you for that.
And that's all you need. When he starts driveling on about the SDR this, the SDR that, you just read that. It's like it'd be like the scene in The Exorcist where he's the devil inside Linda Blair's body. The power of Christ compels you. The power of Christ compels you. Just read that at you know, and you give him an economic exorcism.
Well, I want to thank you, Dave, for saying what you said a moment ago, as far as it's good to hear from someone like Dr. Coates because of the position that he's in, and that was the whole reason that I wanted to bring him on. I mean, do I agree with anything that he said? Of course not. I mean, it's just good to hear from someone that deep in the system.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that's a rare opportunity. It's very rare. I don't know of anybody else out there that's gotten to interview someone of his stature, period. I mean, and so I'm very grateful for that. I mean, it's because it solidifies everything that we have dedicated our lives to understanding, which is the exact opposite of what he was stating. And that's speaking for myself anyway. I mean, that's what I've dedicated my life to, and to educate people in the opposite manner of what he is trying to educate people in, because what he's educating people in is an illusion and a mirage and enslavement. And the further away from gold that you get, the more enslaved your society becomes, and that's a fact. I mean, and this SDR removes sovereignty, any thought of sovereignty at the national level. That's all gone. It's all gone. You now are enslaved at a global level, and you can't get out of it. And that's what to me, that's what the SDR represents.
Well, it does and it doesn't, because here's the thing: the SDR is a Trojan horse in and of itself, because regardless of what currencies are let into it, the U.S. still controls either a majority or a plurality portion of the SDR, and that's why the deep state wants the SD. They know the dollar's toast. They
Right.
want the SDR as the dollar replacement for the reserve currency, because it still gives them political and economic control over the reserve currency, or more control than the other countries that have their currencies represented in the SDR basket.
That used to be true until China was allowed to be in the basket of currencies.
But the U.S. is still the highest percentage of currency. The dollar is still the highest percentage, whether China's in there or not.
That is correct. However, the BRICS nations collectively, their vote outweighs the U.S. Now, it doesn't outweigh the U.S.'s allies and who they can strong arm into going along with their program, but you have on the other side, you have the Eastern viewpoint, and they will back up what China wants to do.
Well, we'll see. I disagree with that, because the U.S. still has economic control over the SDR. The dollar is the highest percentage of the SDR,
Yes.
and therefore the U.S. has economic control over it. It doesn't matter what the politics are. The bottom line is, what's the economic control, and there's nothing in the SDR that prevents the U.S. from, continuing to balloon up its money supply, either directly by printing money or indirectly by printing government bonds. I mean, government bonds are a proxy for a country's currency. And a bond that's issued behaves exactly like money until it's repaid. Well, guess what? The U.S. never repays its debt. It keeps increasing it. So that, in a way, is a de facto increase in the money supply.
It's just disgusting.
Yeah, and so that's what I'm saying. I mean, his view here that the SDR can be the anchor. I mean, that's a bunch of BS. I mean, there's nothing more disingenuous. If he really believes that, then he's an idiot, and I don't believe he's an idiot.
No, I would agree that he is not an idiot, not by any
But again,
stretch.
it's great. I'm glad you didn't attack him. Just let him lay it out there so we can all
Right.
see, that there's he's the king with no clothes on. Open up his cloak, and there's nothing underneath.
Nothing.
Exactly. And he lifted his skirt big time there. And everyone in your audience can see it. And anyone else who understands this and listens to it would be able to see it. I mean, it was great.
I love it. I'm not kidding. I love it.
Well, hang himself in terms of what, your audience and the people who are part of our alternative media community understand. But, if you put that out there on national TV, people would either fall asleep or, people who think they're smart would be, yeah, man, that makes sense. This is great.
Yeah.
Honey, can you hand me the credit card?
I need to order something on Amazon. Oh my goodness. Well, what's on your mind today, Dave?
Well, I can't even remember anymore because I got so irritated listening to this guy. It's.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh my goodness.
And then when he said that CPI overstates true inflation, I mean, I almost fell off my chair.
Yeah, I was really struggling right there. I have to tell you, I was
And
having a
China's
hard
not a
time.
major gold producer, huh? How about they're the largest, you moron?
And it's right there. All you got to do is click play.
And I'll tell you what, when he was talking about how unstable gold has been, and that's actually not true, and I don't have it at my fingertips, but in terms of percentage moves in currencies over like the last 20 years, gold has been way more stable. And then if you introduce, part of the volatility in the price of gold is the intervention, and my guess is he doesn't even believe that gold is manipulated. That would be my guess.
I would tend to agree with that.
He's an ivory tower economist, and my guess is he has no idea just how manipulated gold is.
Even though it's been proven in a court of law.
Right, exactly.
And
that
gigantic lawsuit moving forward.
Right. I mean, the more interesting question would have been, well, how come you think, Dr. Coates, when the U.S. goes in and overthrows these governments, Libya, Iraq, Ukraine. How come the first thing they do is airlift the gold out of there? And where does that gold go? Can you tell me? To be honest with you, he probably doesn't even know how to spell gold because it's been so washed out of the academic system for so long that it's not even a thought in his mind. I mean, he's the perfect example of how academia has completely brainwashed the entire country into gold's not even a thought.
And right, except for jewelry.
The truth is, the University of Chicago was founded by John Rockefeller. And obviously Rockefeller was, basically arm in arm with Rothschild. So of course he wanted to create an institution with pristine academic credibility that he could use to advance this idea of fiat currency and one world, one government.
Well, should we conjure up another topic or just end it there?
Well, is there anything? Oh, I did want to say this, and I'm going to be publishing my next mining stock journal tonight, and I've got in there some reasons why I think this latest sell-off in the price of gold is probably bottomed or close to a bottom. A lot of people especially my subscribers, have emailed me, asking me what do I think will happen to the precious metals and especially the mining stocks when the stock market finally does what we know it's going to do. And it may be headed in that direction now. And I said, well, I can't tell you. The initial reaction is probably going to be that gold and where the precious metals and the mining stocks will sell off along with the stock market. And the reason for that is because hedge funds who are sitting on tons of gold futures and mining stocks, when the stock market starts to fall quickly, they dump everything because they're going to start getting margin calls, because these hedge funds, don't forget, are margined up 5-to-1, some as high as 10-to-1. Even though the 10-to-1 leverage was supposed to be eliminated in 2008, it never was. Most hedge funds, I think, are kind of constrained by their banks and their prime brokers to 4-to-1 or 5-to-1. But at any rate, they dump everything. It doesn't matter. And then they're dumping paper gold, so who gives a crap? And they dump their mining shares. Most of these junior mining shares aren't marginable, so they have to dump everything. But then what happens is that at some point, real gold gets a bid, real silver gets a bid, and then the mining shares follow that. And we've seen that a few times when this has happened. It happened intermittently when the market would sell off between 2000 and 2008. And then it especially happened the best example, obviously, is 2008. Gold bottomed in late October. The mining shares bottomed at the beginning of November. And the stock market, I forget how high it was back then in terms of the S&P. Stock market continued lower, down to, ironically, 666, which I think was probably, the elitists winking at us when they stopped it from falling there. I really do believe that, actually, and I'm not really superstitious, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist per se, but I do think there was some hidden meaning there. It's kind of like that pyramid on the back of the dollar bill with the one eyeball on top. But at any rate, gold, silver, and the mining stocks, went on to new highs after that bottom in the fall of 2008, and that's because gold then behaves as a store of wealth and a store of value. Another instance when that happened, I think it was May 2010. If people remember when the Dow was down 1,000 points in one day.
Yep.
And what happened was early in the morning, the stock market started selling off, and then all of a sudden everything started selling off. Gold was down big, the Huey was down big, and when the Dow went from going down about 400 or 500, and it headed towards down 1,000, all of a sudden the precious metals and the mining stocks did a U-turn, and they actually closed green on the day. The Dow, I think, closed that day down 400 points plus or minus. But the Huey and gold and silver finished green on that day. And again, that's sort of the the flight to safety thing. So,
what makes you think that the stock market is getting ready to roll over?
I don't know. Again, I share charts in my short sellers journal with subscribers, and I've been watching it. I mean, it really, if you look at the S&P, it hasn't gone anywhere in 2 years, okay? And the only time it's made a significant move in the last 2 years, well, let's see, you had a big rally that happened in October to November 2014. And then, it's stunning. It's basically gone straight across, except for the two huge sell-offs that we had starting in August 2015 and starting at the beginning of this year. And other than that, the stock market's basically been flat. And it's forming what could be essentially the broadest top in the history of the stock market. You're looking at a 2-year top. And as the old adage says, the broader the top, the bigger the drop. And I don't know if this is, when it's going to start dropping, but it certainly is starting to look like it. So, again, it's something you have to watch. And I don't, there's going to become a point at which the Fed's not going to be able to step in and stop the cascade of selling. They've created a Frankenstein with HFT systems and with hedge fund algorithmic trading, and at a point they can control it. But at a point, that's when you see, you hear, the way Zero Hedge terms it, the market breaks. Well, essentially, I think where the ECNs, where the largest selling is coming from, they just unplug them.
Right. And just make it stop.
Right. And that's, I wrote about, I don't know, maybe 18 months ago, 2 years ago, I wrote a blog post, and it was during one of these outages in a couple ECNs. The market, we all woke up and the market started heading south quickly. And all of a sudden a couple ECNs broke, and I wrote a blog post, and I had found a graphic where a guy's unpulling a plug from a wall socket, and I created a graphic that said NYSE circuit breaker.
There you
Just
go.
unplug it. And that's probably what will happen. But at any rate, is the market getting ready to drop like it did in August and January? I don't know. I mean, I think that if the Fed went away for a month, there's a chance the stock market could get cut in half.
It needs to. It does. I mean, it needs to drop. I mean, it's out of control. It's an illusion. I mean, Richard Fisher said this is an illusion. He said that. I mean, it's.
Isn't it amazing how these guys all of a sudden get religion when they leave the Fed?
Every one of them.
Not every one of them. Bernanke hasn't, because he's about as criminal as they get, and he's as corrupt as they get. But I mean, Greenspan's out there now, talking about gold, talking about, it's deficits are too big, government spending can't last, government debt issuance has gotten out of control. Here's another interesting indicator, and this was. I don't think anyone mentioned this yesterday when it came out, but there's a couple brokerage firms now that have $1,000 price target on Amazon. And the last time Amazon had $1,000 price target on it was either late 1999 or early 2000. Wow. So again, I'm not superstitious. I'm not, will history repeat there? I don't know, but we know what happened, starting in the spring of 2000.
That's, I don't know. I just don't know.
When I saw the headline, it was an article that was posted on Market Watch, and I saw that, and I'm like, whoa, that's kind of freaky, because the last time $1,000 forecast came out on Amazon, the stock market was on the cusp of taking a major league bath.
Bring it on. Bring on the bath.
And at a point, the government can manipulate and paint the economic statistics that they release, and but they can't will real economic activity. And you're starting to see, subprime auto loans are now defaulting at a rate of about 9%, not delinquent, default. 9%, and Fitch is forecasting a 10% default rate by the end of the year. Well, Fitch is always, they're conservative in their forecast. I'm sure the real default rate's a lot higher. And there was an article in Bloomberg yesterday that talked about how, in general, people are falling behind on their car payments. And that's because the middle class is being squeezed. They're being squeezed by this inflation that Dr. Coates says doesn't exist.
Well, it doesn't. Unless you eat or have children in school or go to the hospital or have insurance or, have a life.
That's right.
There's no inflation.
That's right. And, and that's probably the most insidious part about these people, is that they point to these so-called official statistics like the CPI. See, there's no inflation. They do funny things with blueberry pricing. That was the most idiotic discussion I've ever, or, thing that he was talking about that I've ever heard. Oh, well, let's see. No, that's not quite right, because there's a difference between organic blueberries and non-organic blueberries. And there's a difference, and there's a difference between the different quality levels of blueberries. And so, of course, there's going to be pricing differentials.
And not only that, but the difference in, peak summer when blueberries are everywhere, and peak winter when blueberries are coming out of Chile and nowhere else.
That's right. He has blueberries for brains if he really believes there's no inflation.
Exactly. Well, that's why I wanted to mention that I was a produce buyer for a number of years, and I understand these seasonally adjusted rates. And that's exactly what he was that's what he was describing. That's all right. that was. It's anyway. Well, Dave, have we chatted it up enough for one day?
Probably bored the hell out of the listeners, would be my guess.
Well, then it's just another day. Oh, well, I presume that the Band-Aids, chewing gum, and rubber bands will hold everything together until Monday. We'll just pick it up then and take it from there.
That sounds good to me.
All right, buddy. Have a good weekend.
Thanks. You too.